welcome to This Podcast Cannot Continue, episode 11. We're on the other side. We're in the double digits. I know we were in the double digits last episode, but now we are officially in the double digits.
Yeah, 0 doesn't count because it's nothing, right? So episode 10 was actually just episode 1.
Are you saying episode 1 is actually episode 0?
That's how math works.
I guess so. Yeah, GameCube episode. I had a good time. That was fun.
Yeah, it was a fun time.
I'm curious to see what other people will think about our list.
Yeah, definitely. So far, I haven't heard anything yet, but wait, we haven't published it yet at the time that we're recording this one, so that makes sense, actually.
Actually, I just published it.
Oh, you just published it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
well, it's going to take a little bit for the lists to roll in, or the responses to roll in that case.
By the time you hear this, though, listener.
Some of our friends out there. Yeah, listeners out there.
It's live right now.
Cool.
Yeah. So let's
if you're listening to episode 11 and 10 isn't live, then I messed up.
Yeah. I should be fired.
Anyway, I don't think we have any like real news stuff to cover, do we? Do you want to launch right into topics?
Yeah, we can do that. I was going to say the only news thing that I heard really was, PlayStation maybe teaming up with Discord. That was kind of on my radar this week.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting.
The thing I think that'll be the most interesting about it is sort of some of the cross-platform type of like support, because there's a lot of like games that are cross-platform. And then another experience that I've had has been when I was dabbling around with fighting games is like a lot of people can use Discord like at their PC to play games or whatever, but a lot of people when they were trying to play fighting games were like, because like if they have their console at like a TV or something that's like away from the computer instead of right beside it, like mine, they can't just like be in Discord and play the game. Or like unless like in my case I have a mixer that lets me do it, but a lot of people can't like listen to their console audio and then PC audio in like one pair of headphones or something like that. Or you would get a lot of people that are like, or actually even FF14 players who play on console a lot of the time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They have their phone in their lap to like participate in Discord with like earbuds plugged into it or something, and it's just like it'll be nice for those people to be able to just use like their console headset or whatever and join the rest of us in the Discord calls. So yeah, I'm really happy for that, even though I don't really use my PlayStation line. I mean, I don't have a PS5 yet, but you know what I mean? Like I've never really played my PS4 like online a whole lot other than the odd fighting game matches here and there.
Pretty much just play one-player games on it.
Yeah, I think I originally bought PS Plus for Bloodborne messages because it's not the same without the messages, and then I just never canceled it. So
fair enough. Yeah, that was kind of the only news that I had.
That's a good piece of news.
I didn't have much to say about it either. I just think
there was some kind of leak, not very substantiated, but some kind of leak floating on out of, I want to say it was like a Taiwanese like like some kind of like electronics manufacturer or something, that was like some kind of like rumor / leak / kind of thing that there's like somehow already like another PS5 hardware iteration on the way.
Really?
Which like seems way too early, but
like a Slim or something?
Like it's not clear. That's the issue. They didn't say exactly. I don't know that it's something like that. It could just be like kind of like obviously there isn't a battery in the PS5 other than like a CMOS battery or something. But like I think it might be something subtle that doesn't like constitute like a different model. Sort of like how the Switch had a battery upgrade that was kind of like a silent new version.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
some
kind of like minor iteration like that is probably what I'm thinking instead of any big news. But it was
PS5
interesting to see that make
Pro
the rounds a little bit. Yeah, I don't recall the source on that. Honestly, truth is sometimes Trihex posts like interesting tweets at the start of his stream, and I caught it there. I don't remember whose tweet it was, but as far as I understand, it's not that substantiated. So, but anyway. So interesting news in PlayStation land, I guess.
Yeah.
Really excited about the Discord thing.
Sure. Let's go on to topics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Topics it is. I brought one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a broad kind of topic.
So did I. We always do.
But I think it's an interesting thing to talk about. I was kind of thinking about it a little bit based off the GameCube thing. I was trying to say, well, this is my question.
So are you springboarding off that then? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's hear the question.
So my question to you is, I'm not sure how to phrase this. I was trying to work on phrasing it not in a negative light, but I think I'll go with my original question and then refine it. So don't answer just yet. My initial thing was, why are licensed games usually bad? And I know that we can easily turn to things like harsh timeframes, IP issues, crunch, untested developers, the various things that you could probably guess would happen with a licensed game.
Right.
But more than that, like, what stops them from being good? Because there are situations where licensed games kind of rule. There's a few out there. Classics are like GoldenEye. These weird one-offs that...
Tons of Star Wars games.
Yeah, well...
But there's
also a lot of bad Star Wars games. This is the thing that I'm getting at, is what is it about existing IPs like that in licensed games, whether it's movie tie-ins or really anything? Why are they so hard to make quality things out of? We have things like Spider-Man PS4, which is great. Miles Morales, which is great. We have Jedi Fallen Order, also great. GoldenEye, classic. Like these games, there's just fantastic work in these IPs, in these licensed games occasionally, but for the most part, throughout literally most of gaming history, I think licensed games have always been a little bit you approach them with trepidation. You kind of go, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like right out the gate, if someone goes, there's a licensed game coming out for like this IP, my gut reaction is always kind of just like, well, I'll see. I'm never like, ooh, right. I'm hyped for this. I go like, yeah, hopefully they don't mess it up. Like why? Why is this? Why do you think this is?
Could I propose that I think that it's for a different reason, sort of in the retro days, like back in the day compared to what it is now?
Oh yeah, well back then they just pumped stuff out. It was just literally a cash grab.
So back then I think it was far more of a cash grab, and it was much more like, we've made this movie, we need to sell merchandise. Also, games are like a thing that's up and coming, but essentially licensed games back then were most of the time kind of treated like merchandise and not really that serious. Like, it wasn't really taken that seriously as like a game on its own, I suppose.
Yeah.
So that'd be kind of my theory of anything that sort of comes out of like the retro kind of era. But then modern days, I think it's a lot more based on the scale of the licensed franchise relative to like developers. So what I mean by that is, like, if the franchise that's going to be licensed is something huge like Star Wars or like a Disney thing or something like that, that's when you're going to get a huge company like EA or like Square Enix still having the ability to do like Kingdom Hearts and stuff like that. Like, that's when you're going to have something like really big backing it, and then you're going to get a AAA game. And I think, like all AAA games, licensed AAA games are just as much of a gamble. Like, sometimes they're really good and sometimes they also feel like a cash grab, except the cash grab had a big budget. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's like, I don't really know what else to say about. Did you just
call Kingdom Hearts a licensed game? I mean, it has licensed IP in it, but
essentially, yeah, I would kind of count it like, in a way. Like, I guess what I mean to say is, if the publisher wasn't big, I don't think Kingdom Hearts would have continued. Like, you know what I mean? I don't think Square Enix would have had the chance. I mean, I think that Capcom is much smaller than Square Enix, and we can see that Disney is kind of shied away from being all that happy to let Capcom make Marvel vs. Capcom games. And at the same time, Disney's like, here, Square Enix, have Marvel for your Avengers game.
Right.
Publisher. So you know what I mean? Like, I think, I mean, maybe that was a weird example. But I would consider that like half a licensed game. You know what I mean? It's kind of a 50-50 because it contains a lot of licensed content, but it also contains like a lot of fresh content. It's like a pretty original work too, right?
What about the world of like movie games though? Because those have also been historically kind of a bit of a dice roll. I have seen online, just in the lead up to the new Godzilla versus King Kong movie, some footage of I think it was Peter Jackson's King Kong, the movie, the game. And it's kind of like a hidden PS2 gem, it seems. Like, it's not going to win any awards, but it's a very competent first-person shooter adventure kind of thing. What do you think goes right in games like those? Do you think it's really just the IP rights holders sort of stepping off and letting developers do stuff?
It's probably a mix of two things. I think the developers there has to be probably enough fans on the development team, I would say. of
Okay.
like the work that they're licensing. Like,
Yeah.
because I think if enough people, and especially enough people who are high up in the development team, like care about that, I think they're more likely. Like, it kind of depends. So like, let's say, the executives up high go like, oh yeah, like if we just make like a movie game of this movie or whatever, then it'll be a lot of money, right? And then so they put it on a team, and that team is just kind of like, oh yeah, whatever. I guess this will make a lot of money anyway. Off to work. That's like gonna produce one result. Whereas if you just happen to get like project managers and directors and stuff who are like, oh wow, I love that movie, and I'm so excited that we get to like genuinely. Do you kind of see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. I wonder how often
I
that
think
actually
that would
happens, though.
no idea. I have no clue, and I wouldn't even know where to point to examples where that was the case or wasn't the case. But I'm making a bit of an assumption here because there's all kinds of things that can make a game bad versus good that have nothing to do with like whether the people involved want it to be bad or good.
Right.
But I would say that like my step one essential thing is like if I'm considering several like people to like head this project, I think somebody who, if they're all otherwise of like equal like kind of like skill and like resume like pedigree or whatever, I think that the person who is also like a fan of that work would be like ideal. Like I just think somebody who's a fan of the thing that they're making a licensed derivative or like licensed game, I guess, of like is most likely to treat it with like the respect it deserves.
Okay. I'm going to put forward that I think that's true. You want a team that's behind the IP, but also I do think that what's important is when the game is allowed to become its own thing. So we've all run into this with licensed games where there's a portion of the game that needs to be padded out because a movie's short and a licensed game,
it's like trying to cover the same story.
Yeah. So they usually have fetch quests sometimes or sections like, driving sections inserted into things where you play out something that might have just been a screen transition in the movie. Those kinds of things. But okay, so
actually, you know what?
Yeah.
This reminds me of a conversation I think we had before, and I don't recall if it was in our podcast or outside, but I know we had a conversation where we were discussing like the strength of certain IPs like Star Wars, and in particular I think we discussed Harry Potter. Is like
that the world is more important.
And then so the thing is like historically, as far as I understand, I haven't played any of them to be honest, but as far as I understand, most of the Harry Potter games have been retellings of the films, and people have been pretty lukewarm towards them. Like there's people that like them, most people never, who are like most like I'm gonna get like I know people don't like this term, but I'm just gonna say it, core gamers, right? So people who are like a fan of games for the sake of them being games rather than like somebody who's coming into a game from like the outside IP or whatever because of the licensing. Most like quote unquote core gamers like aren't enthusiastic about like the Harry Potter games. Like you just don't really see that happen. From my understanding, most of the people that played the Harry Potter games bought them because they were Harry Potter fans.
Well, yeah, those games probably weren't for them.
But the reaction to is it called Hogwarts Legacy? Where it's like here's like an open-ended like create your own character, like completely new story outside the books and movies timeline, like use the setting but tell a fresh story, original character, open-ended RPG, and people are suddenly like super excited about the possibility of that game being good. We don't know if it's going to be good or not, but you notice how all you needed to do was focus on the setting and not retell the story, and people suddenly got so much more interested.
Yep. Well, so what I was going to say was it's actually building off of this. There's a couple other PS2 games that I can think of that are really strange licensed games, but don't do what you would think based on the box at all. I don't know if you were aware of these. So
probably not.
There's PS2 games of The Warriors, the movie, and Scarface, the movie.
Okay.
But
definitely the Warriors stands out in my memory as something I saw on the shelves all the time when I browsed EB games in my childhood.
Yep, and there's a Scarface one too. And a super fun fact about these games, neither of them are about the movie plot at all.
Okay.
So The Warriors is actually a prequel, and it's kind of like you go around doing missions and getting into gang fights with your friends. I believe it's a prequel. I've seen some LPs of it. Well, I've seen parts of LPs of it, and
okay.
The Scarface one is legitimately what if the main guy didn't eat it at the end, and actually survived the encounter and then went on to rebuild his empire. It's just like an alternate ending and then a sequel.
Like alternate ending into sequel.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that. I dig that.
And both those games are like, and that's basically like a GTA clone kind of.
Oh, okay.
It has like Vice City vibes, but honestly, both of those games are, I think were.
Oh, you know what? I think the latter, the Scarface one, I think I might have seen a speedrun of that at a GDQ because that's actually suddenly ringing a bell.
It's such an interesting situation because I think it's not obvious by those games packaging or whatever that
they're not just a movie clone.
A retelling of the movie. And I think that's why when people replay them on YouTube and stuff like that, they go, oh, there's stuff going on here. Like, this is interesting.
Isn't what I expected. Yeah.
Because the games aren't forced then to tell a movie to tell a narrative with movie pacing game to pad it out. They can tell a good narrative for a game and not have to pad it out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So then licensing a setting instead of a story, so to speak, is probably if you're not cash grabbing, if you're making a serious effort, probably a better way to go.
I think,
and you know what I think also supports that. Funny enough, I don't know if you would call this licensing. It's kind of hard to, this one might not be fair.
Okay.
In the argument, but just to throw it out there is like Baldur's Gate and like other sort of Forgotten Realms setting type games. Now, I mean, that might be a little too easy because it essentially is a setting for a game. It's like a D&D campaign setting. That's what Forgotten Realms started as, right?
Sure.
But it's the same thing. It is licensed and it is just using the setting, tell a new story. It's worked out for them, right? We've seen a lot of RPGs that. We've seen like Knights of the Old Republic, again, in Star Wars.
I think what we're getting at here is that these kinds of licensed games have the most success when they are. I mean, you're saying when they're based on a world, but I think almost solely that's when we see licensed games really succeed is when they tell an original narrative using an existing IP world. Because I'm really struggling to think right now of a game that tells the movie story or show story and ends up being as good. I mean, okay, the Lord of the Rings beat 'em ups on the PlayStation 2 and GameCube and stuff, those were fun. I had a good time with those. Those are good games. Like, they're good games.
I wanted to loop back around because you originally started this by saying it was the GameCube list. Right. Yeah, GoldenEye. GoldenEye is
because that's what I was thinking of. James Bond games are this interesting licensed product.
And you liked the one on the GameCube, right?
Yeah. Okay. So James Bond games are an interesting licensed thing because people think of for a while there was like a new James Bond game for the movie, right? And that's more or less true. But there's also a bunch of James Bond games that just have their own plot lines that are just sort of like B-movie James Bond plot lines. And
are those the better ones as games?
Like I think Nightfire plays better than some of the other games that are based on the movies, but Nightfire's story is still silly. Like,
sure.
But the point is it's James Bond, so like, and it's also a Pierce Brosnan James Bond. So like those ones were a little bit more campy than like once Daniel Craig took over. So it ends up being like, is that okay? Like, I think that James Bond is this weird thing where it's sort of now equally a book, video game series, and movie, and those things don't have to tell each other's stories anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like the movies don't have to be based on the books anymore. The games don't have to be based on literally anything. It's just the idea of James Bond. And it's not even the world of James Bond because the world of James Bond is just our world. You know, it could just be any spy. It's literally just the name James Bond and then a couple of nods to tropes from the series. So James Bond has always been a weird one that I've thought about when I thought about licensed games. Would you consider Tony Hawk and the other sports games licensed games?
Okay, this is interesting because yeah, they are. I mean, they're paying a license to somebody, but it's not that fitting with what we were just discussing, right? Because if you just say, "Oh, just take the setting," what's the setting? Earth, like the real world. You know what I mean? So in that case, I think because like your licensing is like reality, I think it's more like you're making a game of the sport, which doesn't
who collects royalties when you license reality.
Yeah. So like a sport doesn't have to be licensed, right? And we've seen unlicensed games in like all of these before, right? We've seen like Skater XL, which I don't think has any I think that's not licensed in any form. I think EA Skate probably had names in it and stuff like that, right? I don't actually know. I never played it. But then Tony Hawk games are certainly licensed games.
Definitely.
And you know what? And you know what? I don't know exactly how skate plays, but from my understanding, it's a lot more technical and like about the nitty gritty. And I mean, none of them I think are realistic, but I think it's a little more realistic than Tony Hawk, which is like very arcadey about it.
Yep.
And from what I can tell, skate has a big fan base, and we know the Tony Hawk games have a big fan base, and it's like two different things. So there's kind of room for them to have gone like as wacky as they did with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and then for something like Skate to still exist.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. I think maybe, because both of those are really, well, I don't know if both of those are really successful. I would imagine the reason why we still haven't got Skate 4 is because maybe it wasn't as successful as the very loud fan base would lead you to believe. Because like people have been loud about wanting like a new EA Skate for like what feels like almost a decade.
It feels like that fad ended or something, but I don't know because they just released the HD retools of Tony Hawk 1 and 2.
Yeah, and that has been super successful from
well
received. Also, that's coming to Switch now.
I might buy that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Anyway, that was announced just a couple days ago, actually.
Oh, I totally missed that.
Yeah. I don't know what I know in regards to Skate. What I'm basing this off is every single time we see like an E3 EA presentation or like anything of that nature, like the Twitch chat is just always full of like new skate, and then at the end of the thing, no new skate, sad. Yeah.
Well, so hopefully we'll all get what we're looking for at E3 this year.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
I'm trying to think of any other weird licensed gaming samples.
I want to know what some of the ones on the GameCube were. Like, what else really was it? So, I mean, I guess
it's tough because they were all multi-platform ones that also ended up on the PlayStation 2. So it's in my mind they're all kind of overlapping a little bit.
What about the Wii? That's where we suffered a lot of really bad license games.
That's because the Wii got into that dangerous. The Wii and the DS got into that dangerous zone where people were developing basically shovelware, and I think we kind of reverted back to the like 80s licensed game being total trash and just being a cash grab again. You know what I mean? They were like mobile games for your TV, but worse. Some of them, not all of them, and I think that we did go back to that in the Wii DS days. Those systems are, to me, as a collector, people who want to do complete collections of both those systems, I applaud you, but I don't understand it because in my mind, there's just so many titles for those two systems that are absolutely not worth playing.
What's that old phrase? Collection without curation is just hoarding.
Yeah, pretty much. I understand the preservation angle to want to preserve an entire library, but honestly, the Wii's is
I mean, I'm
bloated.
for it too. Like somebody has to do it, but there's a difference between somebody who's, and from my understanding, typically what a lot of people do when they're doing the preservation efforts, especially if a lot of it is rooted in ripping, is you get all of your scans, you get your verified clean dump, and then you return it to the owner because it wasn't your copy to begin with, or you bought it and then you just sell it again, right? Like a lot of people don't hold on to everything that they have contributed to a preservation effort via scans or rips or any various means, right? At least that's been my understanding. Like, for example, I can't remember who it was, unfortunately, but I remember hearing a story about somebody sending like their SNES collection, like full set of like, I think PAL carts, it might have been, like overseas for somebody to get clean dumps, and the shipment was like lost.
Cool. So it's in the bottom of the ocean now.
Maybe.
Well,
yeah.
So
kind of a disaster, but anyway, that's the exception, not the norm. But I'm just throwing out there that like what I mean to highlight is that it has been a thing where people will, loan or temporarily buy games to do their preservation of it. So owning the full set of Wii games is like, the people who are doing that are almost always collectors and not necessarily preservationists, but preservationists lean on collectors who are generous enough for lending and stuff like that.
100%. It's
all the same. So somebody's got to do it. Yeah, someone's got to do it. As much as I don't advocate that anyone collect Wii, someone's got to do it.
Getting back to licensed games, though, I think that those kinds of systems that have a huge install base are like the Switch is running into this too. I'm finding a little bit in their eShop. There's just a bunch of games that are, kind of whatever. And a lot of them are licensed products. not exclusively, because we also have the indie cash grab scene as well to compete within there, which is not always licensed, but sometimes is. Yeah, I'm not really sure what I hope to gain by asking this question originally.
Well, it's okay. You know what I'm thinking of?
I just got thinking about it, because it's such a up and down field. If you have licensed games in your library, people go like, "Oh, really?" Sometimes, and you go, "That one's actually really good." And it's always strangely you have to feel like you're defending it, unless it's Star Wars. Then people are usually they have nostalgia for it. But
it's kind of a funny thing to consider too is when games have just licensed games to each other. So like an
Tekken
example
versus Street
is
Fighter, Tekken Cross Street Fighter, whatever, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, or like another example that I thought of when we were having this conversation, I've been sort of looking at my own game library and just thinking about this. It's like Tetris is almost always licensed because the Tetris company owns it, but they don't frequently make their own games. They license Tetris out.
Yep.
And then so you get situations like Puyo Puyo Tetris, which is like made by Sonic Team and Sega. And so it's like they've licensed Tetris but mixed it with their own other game, and you can like play the one form against the other or whatever. Or you just have like really souped up versions of Tetris, like Tetris Effect, which is by I know it's by like the Res Infinite director. I can't remember what the company is called right now that did Tetris Effect, but you know what I mean? It's I don't know. It's cool.
That, Sony Battle Royale All Stars. What was that game called? The Sony Smash clone. Remember that one?
I no, because I only found out very recently that it existed.
Really?
Yeah, like I somehow the entire time that it like existed when it would have been new or relevant, I just totally had no idea what was going on. Nobody told me. I never was advertised to. Like I never caught wind of it. I didn't know it existed until like just a couple of years ago.
That game is a strange licensed game because all the characters that were licensed for it, like every single one of them that you see, I know it's supposed to be like a Sony All Stars, but when you look at it, that the roster, you kind of are left going, wait, what?
Where is?
No, not even where is. You're just like staring at it, being like, I mean, I guess so. Like that's like the emotion that I had from it. Whereas like with Nintendo, you're just like, oh, I can be Mario, I can be Diddy Kong, I can be Samus. It's very exciting. But that game it was so strange.
So it just didn't have a great roster.
Well, then? It was like you can be like, what was it? You'd be like Ratchet and Clank versus Nathan Drake and Sweet Tooth from Twisted Metal.
What's the problem with any of that?
There's no problem with that. It's just weird. Two of those people are basically just humans, mass murderers.
That is going to be a bit of a problem. Yeah, just the fact that it's like, oh, this is just some person. But I don't know. It seems weird, but maybe it's fine. I don't know. But
also, really Nathan Drake for Smash? Like. Yeah?
I don't know. No opinion. I don't know anything about him. I want to see more indies get licenses. Like Cadence of Hyrule or
yes.
Ori from Ori and the Blind Forest, which is like, okay, that's also is an indie, but Ori is in Rivals of Aether, is it? Do I have that correct?
I do not know.
I think that's correct.
That would be cool. I you know why? Because this goes back to what you were talking about before, whereas if a small developer or an indie got a license, I would think my first thought is that team maybe pushed for that license and therefore is attached to the IP and wants to do it justice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I don't think that's always the case, but I think there's a good chance of that sometimes. Maybe some of these IPs should let the indies have at their licenses.
Yes.
I don't know how much those cost though. Like how would you pitch that?
I can correct that, or I can confirm that Ori is in Rivals of Aether because it looks like they're on the art on my Steam library page. Yep. Anyway, so I think in the case of Cadence of Hyrule, I don't think that was such an example of like, what's the company band Crypt of the Necrodancer called? I can't remember, but I don't think that was a case of like the Necrodancer team being like, hey, let's like pay you for this. I think that was a little bit more like, whoa, we had this idea. What do you think? And then Nintendo was like, okay, do it. And then kind of.
I feel like licensing stuff from Nintendo is probably super difficult.
Well, I'm assuming in that case, that was less of an upfront paid license and more of like the proof of concept was compelling. Nintendo was on board and I'm assuming is taking a cut and probably a very sizable one of the sales, right? Or
just saying,
did they take over and publish it? I don't even know if they even just published it. I don't know. But my point is like licensing, when you say, okay, the licensing is expensive, sometimes that doesn't have to occur. All I'm saying is like, so in the case of indies is like, sometimes that doesn't have to occur in a way that is like prohibitive to even start because you can't pay up front. If you see what I'm trying to say, because instead there's sometimes like a route towards it that's probably based on royalty of sales, which is I'm guessing how it happens in almost every case when an indie is getting their hands on a bigger IP. But that one was really cool, Cadence of Hyrule. Also, I want to say, what's that company called that did all those like sort of VN, well, not really VNs, but you know what I mean? Those like story, Telltale games, is that it?
Oh,
because Telltale Games had a ton of
Walking Dead,
of licensed stuff.
The Batman one. Yeah.
I think even Wolf Among Us was technically a comic book, so that was an original.
There's hope out there for the licensed game.
They had Tales from the Borderlands.
We've definitely seen good examples.
Licensing a game from a game.
Yeah, we've seen good examples of licensed games. I just think that still, that if you would call it a genre, that whole blanket umbrella term does.
I don't know. I don't feel like it's been. It was okay. I will say like the problem is we can mention so many good ones because they're memorable, and it's really hard to mention any of the bad ones because we've all tried so hard to forget them. And I know there was a lot of bad ones, especially in that Wii era, PS2 era, stuff
also
like that.
All through the 90s.
Yeah, but these days, I feel like if they're bad, they're usually only bad because they were a AAA cash grab, and most of the time, it's actually like decent stuff these days.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I feel like most licensed stuff nowadays is at least like you're going to have a decent time.
Yeah.
It may not be like mind blowing, but
yeah, I think it's definitely moved into the realm of being, you don't have to approach it with the, is this going to be absolutely garbage mindset that you used to kind of have to.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
I really want to see a lot more, cross game licensing, like I mentioned before with like the Puyo Puyo Tetris, or like maybe even like with we see it all the time in like the fighting games where there's guest characters and stuff like that. Totally. I just think it's great. I think it's really really fun. I want to see more of that. Oh, apparently Shovel Knight's in Rivals of Aether too. So there's another one. That game's really doing it. Or even like when we were talking about Telltale, like Tales from the Borderlands is really cool because you got like that Borderlands feel, but in a completely different, like story wise, but in a completely different context. I mean, I don't know how good it was. I didn't finish it, but it was kind of an interesting idea, right? And so I don't know. I like that, and I want to see more of that. And I want to see indies get their hands on bigger licenses because I just think Cadence of Hyrule as like a proof of concept of that. What was cool. Just like
it was
just
an awesome little experiment.
Just nailed it. Yeah. So let's get more of that, please.
And you out there,
I'm down for licensed stuff these days.
You out there in podcast land, let us know what your favorite licensed games are. I'm sure we missed some, as I already highlighted. There was like this weird. There's always some weird.
It's hard to even remember what
gems.
The bad ones are. What are the bad ones?
E.T.
Sometimes it's like the game is bad, but also
E.T.
good.
on Atari.
Yeah, of course, legendarily bad.
I think it's more just that they're underwhelming, to be completely honest.
Yeah. What's the deal with the SpongeBob game, Battle for Bikini Bottom? Is it actually good or is it actually bad and people just kind of like it? I know it's a good speed game, but sometimes terrible games are good speed games.
Okay, well, this will be my last bit on this topic.
Sure.
But that game, so the re-release people are not a super big fan of. It seems to be a mixed reaction because it looks way better and everything, but it's been updated in a way where I feel like it's one of those things where if you go back to the original, that game perfectly plays fine for the era. It's a retro GameCube PS2 game. It's character platformer game that's completely competent and has just the right amount of SpongeBob writing that it has a charm to it.
Okay.
I think the rehydrated version, what people found was like the multiplayer was tacked on and some of the stuff didn't age well and also wasn't updated for quality of life. So it ended
felt
up
like
being,
it wasn't really a good value proposition over just having the original.
Yeah, exactly. That seems to be my takeaway. The SpongeBob IP is another one that sort of is all over the place for quality. There are some games in there that are actually like pretty fun, and then there's some that are just like,
okay.
And I've already told you my favorite licensed game, which is Hamtaro, Ham Hams Unite. Emulate that. That's a good time. That's not necessarily for you. That's literally for anybody listening.
Yeah. We talked about that before.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into my weird love obsession with that game, but okay. What do you got today?
Yeah. So what I want to talk about is like why, or not why, because I don't think it's gonna be easy to get to the bottom of like where it came from. But I just kind of want to like explore the trope of like how most or many JRPGs seem to have like a prison break.
Oh my God! Yeah,
Just
you're
as
totally
like a
right.
thing.
Yeah.
So like I first thing I started about when this kind of occurred to me is like a list of ones that I've played that have a prison break, and so like the very first one
Did
that
you
comes
make
to
a
mind,
list?
a little bit, yeah. And
Do
so
tell.
the very first one that comes to mind that I think may have sort of started it. So I'm not saying there's never been a jailbreak in a RPG before this, but I think this is the one that probably inspired a lot of the Japanese developers who kept including them in JRPGs like ever since would be Chrono Trigger. Because I think that one made just such a powerful impression, that first one. So the funny thing is there's two in Chrono Trigger because you are also imprisoned when you're on the plane. Is it the Blackbird?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so there's actually kind of two jailbreaks in Chrono Trigger, but that first one made like I think a huge impression on like the Japanese industry at the time.
Okay, this is an interesting theory.
And then some other ones that I landed on were like Tales of Vesperia.
Yep.
Has two of them as well. Tales of Berseria kind of has one very early on.
I think all the Tales games have it generally.
Final Fantasy 12 has one.
That one's good too.
Dark Souls 1 starts in a prison. I don't necessarily know if you'd say it's a JRPG, but let's say it's a Japanese game that is an RPG. Even though it's not a JRPG by like...
Well, it's an action RPG.
Yeah. Well, I just mean it kind of means a genre more than Japanese made RPG these days. So I'm just throwing it out there because I think that this is the trend that is less tied to the genre and more tied to like Japanese game that is an RPG. But anyway, Dark Souls 1. You start in a prison, and you also go to the Duke's Archives cell, like when you were in there at one point. Bloodborne has its Hypogean jail part. Dragon Quest 11, you said? At what point?
Right at the start.
Oh yeah. Yep, you're right. When they say that the Luminary is bad or whatever. It's not really like I can't say too much. Well, it's not a huge spoiler, but there is a little section in Persona 5 where you do a bit of a jailbreak, as well as just there's tons of theming in Persona 5 around being in jail, with its Velvet Room being a jail.
Right.
Deltarune, not Japanese game, but clearly very JRPG inspired, has a jailbreak. You could also position that being put in the garage by Papyrus and Undertale is a bit of a jailbreak, but not really.
Final Fantasy 7 has a jailbreak. Final Fantasy 8 has a jailbreak.
Final Fantasy 7 has two.
Final Fantasy 9 has a jailbreak. Final Fantasy 10 has a jailbreak.
Yeah, so I'm starting with just the ones I played, right? But I did do some Googling after my own.
6 has a jailbreak, sorry.
9 has one as well.
No, I already listed 9 though.
Okay. I started doing a lot of Googling, and so I hadn't mentioned the ones that I Googled, but yeah, I do have 8, 9, and 10 on this list. I have two separate lists, one of like the ones I knew for myself and one that I Googled where I can't, like, apparently, like I can't confirm these ones personally, but like apparently Legend of Dragoon has one, Tales to Azure has one, East 7 has one, Grandia has one. Apparently the Dragon Quest V hero spends 10 years in prison at some point. I didn't know about that.
Oh yeah, that's okay.
Apparently in Kingdom Hearts 2, you start the Tron level in like a jail of some kind. Yeah, there's like it's just like in like rampantly like throughout the entire genre.
Yeah.
There's these like jailbreaks, and like they also have a lot of like really weird traits too. Like a lot of the times, like you get out via a secret passage, or there's like some kind of button, or you do like
sewers,
a key steal, right?
Key steal sewers, or you have to act so the guards come in, and then there's like a mini encounter.
Yeah. Like it's actually like a trope of the genre. I also want to say like sometimes again, I know I mentioned like they're not really JRPGs when I mentioned the Souls games, and like likewise, there's the debate about whether it counts or not, but I think most people would say it doesn't count. But even the Zelda series has done it a couple times, because I know you do one where you dig your way out as Wolf Link and Twilight Princess. Yep. And then if I'm not mistaken, do you yourself ever get caged or jailed in any form when you're Deku Link in Majora's Mask? Or do you only just save the monkey? So it's like you're not really saving yourself, you're saving a monkey. I can't remember, but I feel like you get
I think you're just saving the monkey. But you go into
I think
his
I might be
cage.
confusing
You
it
go
with
into like
saving
a
the
secret
monkey.
entrance in the back to go into his cage.
Oh, okay. So I
Yeah.
mean, you jailbreak someone else. It loosely counts. So I had some thoughts about their purpose, essentially.
Okay. Yeah. I have some thoughts as well.
So one of the purposes I figured is like they introduce power in some form. So I think there's a couple of different ways that can work.
Like narratively, they introduce power.
Yeah. So sometimes it's the adversary who like put you in jail because
Yes.
it's a thing that like disempowers you, right? So what it does is it gives the villain, or like at least the villain at that time, or whoever had this power to put you into jail, like it gives them a power over you, and it like really highlights how significant that is over you, which like can help to make a villain like imposing. Like it not justifies, but like it presses home like the point that like this person is actually threatening to you. You know what I mean? It helps more than like just dialogue.
But what about
would, or,
situations like Chrono Trigger where
But I also
the
want to
Chancellor
say,
isn't a problem? He just thinks that you kidnapped the princess.
yeah, I mean, not everything's gonna follow. Like I didn't. So this isn't, for example, the only purpose. This is like
Okay.
a purpose, right? And so like another one I want to give a bit of an example to, but unfortunately I can't say too much about it. Is sometimes the power isn't just of the enemies, but also of like the potential allies. So like
Sure.
when Raven is able to talk your way out of the first jail in Tales of Vesperia, tells you that Raven has some kind of control over the situation. It suggests that he has some form of power over the situation.
Yeah, he's got some authority or something.
Sometimes, on the other hand, I think it like raises well, I mean, I guess introducing power and raising the stakes, it's sort of the same thing, right? But I think in a lot of cases it like raises the stakes. So maybe in Chrono Trigger it doesn't necessarily introduce or like show you the power of any one figure, because you're right, the Chancellor just believes that you were kidnapping. So like on the other hand, it still raises the stakes in that scenario.
Well, more
right?
importantly, in the Chrono Trigger example, what it does is it gives the game narrative reason to usher you into the next time period because you can't stay where you are currently because you're
right.
wanted.
Yeah, that too. It just keeps. I mean, yeah, every plot point. I mean, or most plot points will like move the plot, advancing the plot. Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Well, no, but I don't mean just advancing the plot. I mean advancing the plot in a very I think a very clever way. Because that's one thing that happens in JRPGs. Like, we have to run away, and then you leave the town. It's like, you're on the world map, and you can just go back to the town, get items
right.
and stuff.
Okay. So it like forces you to leave at least for a while.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's an agreeable point. Yeah. Sometimes I think it's kind of an interesting puzzle sequence as well. This is another
kind of remove
version that I thought about it.
Especially if you're playing the game and you're over leveled or you have stuff going
It like
on.
takes away your equipment, so now you have to like navigate your way through the scenario until whatever the reacquisition of equipment point is.
I will say as a sticking point, it's also a classic time for them to introduce stealth mechanics out of nowhere in games that don't have stealth mechanics usually.
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, and so I want to say, when I say puzzle sequence, I don't just mean, navigating it without your equipment or whatever. Sometimes it's literally a puzzle sequence, right? So like when I mentioned Deltarune earlier, there's like a button puzzle that you do to get out of that one, or various other like games, like maybe you have to like slide a box, or like, sometimes it's an excuse to put in a puzzle sequence, yeah.
Chrono Cross.
I mean, there could be a lot of different. Yeah, I heard that. That was one of the ones I saw in my Googling.
Sort of.
Apparently, Tales of Fantasia has one as well.
Yeah, it does. I've played that game. I forgot.
Yeah, it's like extremely common. And I was wondering a little bit about where it came from, but I didn't want to try super hard on this one because I think that there could be maybe cultural touch points that we don't understand. I don't know, maybe you know something about it. So like, actually, this is kind of funny. My mom called me before we started the podcast, and she said on the phone with me, because she asked what I was going to do tonight. So I'm recording a podcast episode, and I told her a little bit about what my subject was. And my mom was like talking about like how films and stuff, because that's like what she's familiar with,
Sure,
which have like prison escapes or jail escape themes or events in them, like are often based on like real stories and stuff like that, right? So like, you know what I mean? You have all these like historical like times that it has happened, and like those stories are like really exciting, and so like people kind of like pattern like the ones in the movies and stuff after like real world ones. And so like I don't know like what would if there's could be something like that in like Japanese history or like that's understood in Japanese like pop culture folklore in air quotes. Do you kind of know what I mean when I say that? Like
Yeah, I'm
not literal folklore and mythology, but like the sort of like the pop culture mythology, just like how I don't know.
I'm really not sure, but from a gameplay perspective, I think what they really do, if you extend this from JRPGs just to games in general, across genres, everything, what these sections usually do, especially in action games, shooters, FPSs, it's like, think about how you get into these situations. You get knocked out, or there's a situation where it's a scripted event and you can't do anything, and you as the player are powerless to interact with the world, but then your character also is powerless in the narrative situation, and then they literally take you from perhaps a level or a zone or a place that you used to think was safe, or that you knew your way around, or you had completed the map, or you knew where all the items were.
Bloodborne example is like a huge one for that.
Yeah, and it drops you somewhere that you are, as a character and as a player, completely unfamiliar, and you have to fend for your own. So that can be a really interesting storytelling device, because that puts you, the player.
That's 100% how the Bloodborne one works.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because even when you get there, like you can't, because normally you can just like die and go back to your last lantern, or whatever.
You can't
but
leave.
The Bloodborne one, you can't leave till you actually get out of it, which is really cool.
So what I think this does in games is it leads you to this situation where you are. I think it's really cool when games make you experience the same thing that the protagonist is experiencing, but it has to do it in an interesting. Obviously, games are so fantastic in like the term where it's like fantastical, and a bunch of other things that it's very hard to make you actually feel the emotions or feelings that the character is feeling because of the disconnect between the two things. But I think in this case, this is one way you can reach beyond the screen and make the the person playing the game feel something, because they're also disoriented and taken by surprise. Sometimes, if you know it's coming, it's not usually a surprise. Sometimes it's a huge setup, but that's not really the point. The point is that you're in a situation where your familiar stuff won't work anymore, and it's disorienting on two levels, to the player and to the character in the game.
True, yeah.
Which I think is a really neat way. The character has
I think that's a good example of the functionality of it.
Yeah.
Explanation of the functionality of it. Definitely, yeah. That's another good purpose for it, yeah.
Because that, more than any other sort of trope, well, I don't know about any other trope, but that is usually how I see it being used. For example, in Final Fantasy X, by the time you get to the part where you end up in jail, your whole party's together. You probably have played a bunch of Blitzball, have a bunch of...
Now, what part is the jail? Because I'm actually curious. When I Googled it, I don't remember this place feeling like an imprisonment. Is it the Via Purifica?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But
because I don't remember how the context of being in that place works.
Well, you try to save Yuna
when
from...
I was Googling like
spoil it.
JRPG jails, I mean, I've played past that part.
No,
I just don't remember.
For the listeners.
Oh, for the viewers.
But
we are
anyways,
podcasting. I forgot.
the point is you're trapped, and as you work your way through it, you have to get your other party members back. And even though it's short-lived, there is an element of danger there, because no matter how overleveled you are, running into monsters and things as only one character can still be, you don't have the...
It's challenging.
You don't have the same advantage you do. Yeah, because you don't have as many people to pick from. And especially because Final Fantasy X was really big on switching out characters mid-battle, not being able to... Not being able to not even do that because you don't have a full party.
Factor.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. And even when you see it in the other Final Fantasies, I mean, in 7... Well, it was actually 2.
7 has 2 that I was aware of. And you know what's funny? I don't really remember the first one happening in Remake. The first one I have is when you get put in those rooms in the Shinra headquarters and then you get let out. Like, oh, why'd that door just become unlocked? That's in the original, but I don't remember that in Remake.
They didn't do that in Remake. What happens is you get to the top...
Remake, right?
You get to the top floor and you find out there's already blood everywhere. Or not blood for some reason. But
yeah, well, yeah. So I figured, and then it happens in Junon, right?
Well, it also happens at Gold Saucer when you literally go to jail.
Okay, yeah.
But then there's also the Junon one is saving Tifa from being executed.
Right.
Which is not quite prison, but it's essentially a jailbreak section.
More of a rescue then. Okay. Well, all right. So another thing I wanted to say, so like I've been a little bit dishonest about my premise because not long after I was putting together this list, it occurred to me that like, so I presented this as a JRPG trope, but I think it actually happens a lot in Western RPGs too. Because
that's
I think
how Oblivion starts, man.
Yeah, it can happen in basically all of the Elder Scrolls games, whether it's
Also,
literally
that's
part of
kind
the
of
main
how
story.
Skyrim starts.
Yeah, it can happen in basically, mostly Elder Scrolls games. It happens twice, I think, in Dishonored, including it basically starts, and it's how Dishonored starts.
Yep. I think this is, like I said, man. I think
what I
this
mean?
is
Like,
just
I
a
think
trope
it's
across
just
games.
a universal trope. Yeah, exactly. And so I actually kind of think my mom was onto something. And so, like, again, when I was talking about JRPGs, I can't necessarily point at maybe what cultural events might have inspired the possibility of this being a story element in like Japanese media, or at least in Japanese games. But like, I think that it's inspired by like the thrill of the story of real Jailbreaks becoming like, that's a really thrilling story that I was told about this, and like then they write something about it, and then somebody made a book and somebody made a movie, and now people, and it's just become like a plot point that thrills people and has been used in all sorts of media for a really long time.
I agree that I think it's just a media trope across multiple forms of media. But I do think that, I'm going to reiterate again, as a gameplay thing, pretty much uniformly how I've always seen it used is to sort of enfeeble the player.
Oh, yeah. So
And
again,
in part,
like obviously games have found like the mechanical. I think you're 100% right when you were saying that. I'm not saying, I'm just saying like, I think I feel like that was discovered by using it as a plot point first.
Yes.
Because I think it already sort of exists as a plot point in other media first, and
Yes.
people just like that. And then I think you're also right that game developers very quickly too, because it happens in pretty early games, right? Yeah. Like very quickly found out, it has this this shifting of like the player agency like dynamic. Yeah.
It's also a good mini arc, because by the end of a prison break, you usually triumph over either, if not the big bad in a small way, then you triumph over like a sort of like a general or a prison warden kind of character. And then on top of that, you get your gear back. So you go from being nothing again at a midpoint in the game where that could be seen as annoying, like a setback, to being more powerful than when you started. And then, so there's like this, I think it's an interesting way to totally change up the pacing. And then when you get out of the prison, you're kind of, you're already cruising, because you're on such a high of completing this mini arc with a very clear goal. Like there's only one singular goal. And then when you get out of there, it's like, all right, next to the Emperor's Castle, or next to the floating fortress, or next to the, you know what I mean? It's a good jumping off point, because it's a good time to kind of drag the party down and then rocket them into their final stretch, which is exactly pretty much what Final Fantasy X does, to be completely honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
cool. I mean, I think I don't have anything else maybe to say about this one.
Yeah. I just want to say this is a conversation this is a conversation for the future maybe, but I've been percolating this in my brain. The ideas, the ways games can make you as the player connect more with what's happening on the screen. I have some examples. We'll talk about them in the future, but I had not thought of this, and I really like that you brought this up, because this is super interesting to me, because this is another narrative device. The reason why I'm thinking about things like this right now is, as I'm sure, well, I mean, we had been talking about it, and then we had the GameCube episode, and we didn't mention it at all, but we've both been playing Nier Replicant, and I'm not done yet, but man, do I have some thoughts about that, and also then Automata regarding how that game does cool meta things that games don't do to make you feel feelings. And I think even though like no one's probably ever cried over a prison break sequence in a game, I do think that it does a really interesting thing in connecting you more to the character and their experience.
Yeah, I think that exploring the way that a game gets an emotional response is like worth it for any kind of emotion, whether it's like, a big like near ender moment, or whether it's, lock up the character in jail.
Yeah.
I think it's all
oh wait, I do have one last little point about this. I also think the other thing that it does is it establishes that usually not all the time. I'm aware this is not all the time, but in JRPGs especially, I think another trope that goes hand in hand with this is that whether you've been captured by the king or the big bad guy or a neutral party or whatever, it establishes that what your character's mission is righteous and also the correct one and morally the choice that the player should be making, and authority shouldn't stand in the way of that.
It puts you in a situation, yeah, exactly. Authority. It's almost always like a rebellious jailbreak. It's rarely ever like your character is like an actual like legitimate criminal, and you're just like the bad guy, but you broke out of jail. Like that's like rarely ever the plot. So yeah, good point.
Yep,
good point.
I think it just sets up.
I think that's significant. Yeah,
I think it sets up.
Which is why I think it also usually happens quite early in games. Not always, but usually.
Yeah, because what I was going to say is I think it sets up a situation where you can go like, for example, the starting of Vesperia, the very starting, you learn that...
It supports Yuri's argument that the knights are unjust.
Yeah, and it also supports the idea that like he doesn't necessarily do things by the law, but he's doing the thing that is right, or at least right to him.
Yeah.
I know that games do play around with the actual morality of these decisions sometimes, but generally speaking, like in Chrono Trigger, you didn't do anything wrong, and the Chancellor wants to execute you, and you escape, and it's like technically escaping and doing all this stuff is not lawful. But the point is that you have a bigger purpose to serve, and you can't be bogged down by the laws of a tiny country. And and it sort of sets up that idea that you have a grander purpose, which I think this trope also can sometimes do. I
also want to quickly mention a lot of the time, especially in JRPGs, the main character is usually like spends the time to be meditative or introspective.
Yep.
A lot of the time, just really small detail, but just throwing that out there. Another thing I kind of noticed or considered when I was thinking about it.
We're gonna continue this later. Not just jailbreaks, but you got me thinking. I might have to finish Nier first, but I got some topics for the future brewing.
Cool. Yeah. Glad to inspire future content.
Yeah, no, this was cool. I did not expect this at all. And I love talking about RPG tropes. So yeah. All right.
Okay.
Shall we move on to the backlog?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go.
You know what it is. It's the backlog.
And we're back in backlog land. I'm just going to jump right into it.
Go for it.
Mine's a SNES classic.
What?
But it's maybe a strange one.
I don't even know what you mean.
It's literally an SNES classic. But
sorry. Okay.
But it's also on the Switch on the SNES Classics.
Okay,
thing.
I get it. You haven't said the title yet. I was
our mutual friends.
Like, what do you mean? Like the Classic Minis entire library? Like what are you talking about?
Our mutual friend's been playing through them, and I own one of them. And I know that they're kind of a divisive series, even though they're generally considered pretty classic. And I played the Game Boy one of this game to death, like a ton when I was a kid. It was like my favorite Game Boy game. The Game Boy version of it is called Land instead of Country, but Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest, not Diddy Kong's Quest, as I learned recently.
No, Diddy's Kong Quest.
Yeah, because it's generally considered to be kind of the best parts of the other two. Like the soundtrack's phenomenal, obviously. The graphics are sweet for the time period. It improved upon the original Donkey Kong Country, which was a good game, but not the best platformer. I think that Donkey Kong Country 2 is the superior game.
I honestly have one issue with DKC 2.
Yeah, what is it?
I think it starts off boring aesthetically.
Oh, with the pirate ship and everything?
And then followed up by like the bramble stuff.
Yeah.
I think I just don't find the environments of the beginning couple of levels like that like thrilling or exciting to look at. Like it's kind of like it starts the pirate thing, which like makes a whole lot of sense coming right after DKC 1, but it also is kind of like I just sort of like felt like I already had my fill of that when we dealt with K. Rool and DKC 1. Like, why are we doing this again?
Yeah, that's super fair.
But I mean, it's still a great game.
I honestly...
it's true that it's the best one.
Honestly, I kind of have a problem with...
I haven't played enough of it, but I believe that.
I have a problem with the aesthetics of most of the Donkey Kong Country games because I think what I really want from them is more what Returns and Tropical Freeze did in terms of environments. Those kind of I don't know, like varied, colorful, lots of fun stuff going on. Whereas I found this sort of more, maybe it just reminded me too much of like Canada, but there was just like a lot of like coniferous forests and like, you know, I was kind of expecting more ruins and jungles and stuff. And it was because it happens on a tropical island. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just like, I have such fond memories of playing the Game Boy game, Donkey Kong Land 2. And I played, like I said, I played that to absolute tears. It came on a yellow cartridge. I don't know why it was that one and not the first one or the third. Was there a third one? I don't remember. But anyways, that one was the one that I played a lot. And then I got a Super Nintendo, and I had the seller that I bought it from put in Donkey Kong Country 1, and I actually have that, and I have a Famicom card of it as well. But I haven't really done the spring for the second one or the third one, and I actually just really like those games, and I haven't played them all the way through, and I know they're a little bit challenging.
For me, this series was always largely something I'd played only at friends' houses who had it when I was growing up. So yeah, I you know, this entire franchise, both like the first trilogy, which I've started on, I have save files on the go, and then also I would even like to take a run at Returns and Tropical Freeze, which I've bought.
Returns
and then
is really good.
I think I put this on a prior backlist. I could be wrong, but I think I did. I think I put Yooka-Laylee 2 on a prior backlist as sort of a spiritual successor to DKC. And I'd really like to play all of this stuff and be able to both support my understanding of that spiritual successor comment and also just enjoy all of these games. Yeah. That's actually all on my backlog too, but I'm not going to cop out and just say me too. But do you have anything more to say about Donkey Kong Country? Any more thoughts?
Not really. It's just a series that I've always kind of... I had the Game Boy one, and then I had Donkey Kong 64, and I loved both those games when I was a kid, but I never really played the Super Nintendo ones, and even as an adult. As carts, for being a classic Super Nintendo game that a lot of people like to have, they made a ton of them, and they're not really that hard to find, especially in North America. So the prices on them are still pretty good. I've just never really taken the plunge, but I'm thinking I might sometime.
Okay, cool.
And you? What do you got going on?
All right, so this is a bit of a weird sort of twist, and I don't think I'm actually going to play this game. And I don't even necessarily know that it's right to say that it's on my backlog.
Sure.
But it's an old game that I'm considering playing, so I mean, it sort of fits in the nature of a backlog, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I've been looking at this a little bit, thinking about it a little bit, and it's coming out. I think we just got a leak or something, or maybe it was an official announcement. I don't pay that close attention to this for June. So I'm kind of like, I don't really know, but I'm working on something in FF14. But anyway, I've been considering trying out WoW Classic with the Burning Crusade coming out.
Did not expect this.
So here's the thing. Like, I never really properly got to play WoW, right? I tried a little bit during like the original runs, Wrath of the Lich King era, when I was in like middle of high school, because I had some family members that played it, and I think by then I had a job, my first job. So I tried it out a little bit. I think I played my free 30 days and then an extra like time card or something, and then I let it fall by the wayside. I originally didn't buy into WoW because there was a sub fee, and at the time it launched, I didn't have any means to pay it because I was an unemployed kid, you know, as most kids are. So I got into Guild Wars 1. Yeah, I got into Guild Wars 1 instead because that was a buy it once kind of model, right? And so like while there were, you know, expansions to that game, essentially I could buy them with like Christmas or birthday money or whatever. And you know, every kid our age, I feel like, played RuneScape at some point. You know, I played a bunch of that as well. And all kinds of free-to-play MMOs. Like somehow in my childhood, like the genre was like already super fascinating to me because it was just like, it just represented like an online world. And I was like a kid who like had access to the computer like a lot of the time growing up. So it was like something that I was always able to get into. Like I feel like I must have like played my first MMO when I was like 9 or something, or like
really,
I was like really young when I remember there was one called Estonia 3 It was like an isometric 2D perspective game I got to try out. And then I remember playing a lot of like the old like Korean ones. I remember there was one called it had like 3 different names. It had like Air Rivals, I think, or no. Yeah, I think so. Or at one point, I think there was a version that was launched that was called Space Cowboy Online that was like a third-person flight, like MMO or whatever. So anyway,
Okay.
I guess I'm just saying, like, in my sort of gaming history, like, MMORPGs have actually always been like a really like high importance genre in gaming for me.
For sure.
And so it seems weird that I'm like a huge fan of the genre and I've like never really spent any time with WoW. And I know as well that the experience that you get today, because everyone sort of has described feeling this with Classic, is not the same as what it was in actual vanilla, right? That these are essentially 2 different concepts, because nowadays everyone knows everything there is to know about the game and it's like min-max to death, and you're not going to buy into Classic or Classic TBC like I'm looking at or whatever and get that same experience that the people who played it originally did. But I don't necessarily think that means that I can't still have like a good experience with the game that is still in essence like an MMORPG form of retro gaming. I just think that, you know, because I think a lot of what made the vanilla experience what it was would have been the community at the time. But like all the game elements were still the same. And so like, yeah, I won't have the same experience of like nobody knowing what to do and like the same wonderment of like exploring this world that's new with everybody and the whole thing being really novel. But like when I go do such and such raid, I'll have a similar experience, albeit far more min-max now because everyone knows what to do. But you know what I mean? So like,
okay, but
my understanding is that
why do you want to play this game though? Is it just to understand the history?
Kind of, yeah. Because like my understanding is like this is like WoW's like best expansion it ever had, right?
Gotcha.
I mean, so I know there are people who would say Wrath of the Lich King instead, but I think most people would at least find that to be like an understandable argument. Like there's a lot of people that make that argument, and I think even the people that disagree with it for TBC would say like understandable, but I disagree. Or do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's like my understanding is it's like the peak era of WoW, and so I would like to just try it to just like understand a little bit more of like what that best era of like one of the most the most influential game in the genre was like, as like a way to educate myself in the genre that I so deeply have loved all my life, I guess. So it's weird. I kind of want to play it for like a historical connotation. And that's the reason why it feels like a backlog game to me, because I feel like I owe it to myself or even to my experience with other games in the genre to play it, even though I know that I'm not going to have the time if I want to keep progging an ultimate difficulty raid in Final Fantasy 14.
Right.
And I've been messing around with Guild Wars 2 again on the side. Like I wasn't kidding when I said I was a big fan of the genre, dear listeners. But I mean, I can put aside like the Guild Wars 2 dabbling or whatever for a while if I want to give like a month or 2 to try out WoW Classic TBC. My other big barrier, not to like, I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to talk about these things. Is like I have like essentially political disagreements with like Activision Blizzard as a company.
Yep.
So like there's a little bit of like I don't really want to give them money.
Oh yeah, that's another. Okay, I had forgotten
Aspect.
about your feelings towards this company, so that makes this even more of a surprise.
So it's a really difficult one for me to want to consider. So I'm actually this is why it's maybe a little bit cheating, because I don't necessarily know that I can say it's on my backlog, because I really am fence sitting here, right?
Yep.
But because of like the reason that I want to do it being sort of a historical, or at least like a self-educating / historical like reason to do it, that's sort of why it still feels like it's a backlog pick, even if it's something that I'm unsure of, and it's also something that's coming out still. But I don't know, I don't know. I'm thinking about it, but yeah.
Well,
that's really all I have to say about that. But
I look forward to hearing all about it. But you're definitely not going to get me into that one. I'm sorry.
No, I wouldn't try
with Final Fantasy 14, but I don't know that World of Warcraft is really my speed aesthetically or gameplay wise.
And for some context to listener, I was also like Discord screen sharing him a little bit of Guild Wars 2. I'm not trying to get you into Guild Wars 2 or anything either. Like I know that you'll like happen. Yeah, like I know that you like FF14 because it's FF, and like I don't.
I'm a huge
it's not my business. I don't make make it my business to like convince anybody that they should like play an MMO just because I do. I mean, I actively told you not to play FF14 for like a long time. It wasn't until the pandemic that I felt like, okay, maybe this guy has some time now.
This guy has some time, and he's a huge Final Fantasy nerd.
No, as somebody that's played MMOs all my life, like I've long since learned the lesson that like it's not worth trying to convince anybody that they should play an MMO. Like they kind of have to want it on their own.
You can lead a horse to WoW, but you can't make him grind.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. I have no idea. Actually, the grind is kind of a bit of a thing too. Like if I want to do this as a side game, like I don't want this to, I can't like afford to replace sort of like too much FF14 time with this game. Like it's not, you know what I mean? But like if the point of playing it for me is that I want to get in and raid and stuff like that, I feel like it's going to ask me for a lot of my time. So I think what I might do is get in some of the like the WoW discords and like ask the classic players like how much time and like what they felt about their experience with like vanilla classic, and maybe after some of those conversations make my decision. I don't know. We'll see. So yeah, you look forward to hearing from it, but you might not hear anything from it. I might not do it.
Well,
anyway,
you'll keep me on the edge of my seat trying to figure out if you are going to do it.
Sure. I mean, maybe it'll spawn a topic about MMORPGs or something in the future.
Now that I have some experience in them, I'm definitely more open to talk about them because I feel like I can actually say something about them now.
Right, of course, yeah.
Before it was just me speculating, going, I'm a grumpy person who doesn't think that they're fun. and now I just re-upped my Final Fantasy subscription again for a long, long period of time. So I would assume that this is going to keep going.
Cool, yeah. Well, all right. I think that's all I had to say about that. So do you want to wrap it up or anything else?
Let's wrap it up. As usual, we look forward to hearing anything you out there in podcast land want to say. If you want to find us, we're at TPCC_podcast on Twitter. We're posting pretty regularly. We're going to pick Snester Days back up. We got real bogged down with actual backlogs of things that we definitely meant to play near, and then also Final Fantasy kind of released a patch, and but we're gonna pick that back up. And I hope you really enjoyed the GameCube episode. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say I mentioned the thing without mentioning the date. I just clicked my Reddit and my eyes landed on the TBC Classic releases June 1st. I don't know, just in case anyone's wondering the date. I mean, this episode might come out. Well, this episode will come out before then, so. I mean, I figured I mentioned it, but didn't mention the date.
June 1st, I hope so.
Yeah, it will. I forgot what day it was. You know what I mean, though? Just to mention it without mentioning the date. Well, then I saw the date, so I figured I'd throw the date in there. So I had to derail you.
Not at all. So yeah, let us know what you think. Tell us what RPG tropes or game tropes you think are prevalent and what they do to the gaming experience for the player. Tell us about your favorite licensed game or one that you absolutely found terrible. I want to know these hidden PS2 gems, though, because I've been looking at my PS2 a lot lately, and there's some stuff in there that I want to play that I definitely skipped over. So let me know if there's any good licensed ones out there that I'm missing out on. And for now, though, but for now, I'd say that this podcast cannot continue.